Braves dropped the series finale with the Colorado Rockies, meaning they are tied with the Mets for the final wildcard spot. We'll break it down on this episode, Braves Today. Yes, welcome on into Braves Today for Friday, September 6th. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. Follow me on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. Joined by Christian Rauh. You can follow him on Twitter at Christian S. Rauh, R-A-U-H. You can find all of our written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, where we drop thousands of words on a regular basis. All right, so Christian, the story I dropped last night was takeaways from the series finale between Atlanta and Colorado. Colorado wins this game in frustrating fashion. We're going to talk about some individual stuff that happened in this 3-1 loss, I think in the second segment. But right now, I want to talk about big picture here, okay? Because you are now in a tie for third place in the National League wild card. The margin for error is gone now because you are tied with the Mets. And if you're curious about tiebreakers, folks, the way that these work is the first tiebreaker is record against one another. Right now, you are 5-5. Obviously, 3 games left against the Mets, so that is somebody will have that tiebreaker. The second tiebreaker is record in the division, and the Mets hold that tiebreaker. So obviously, no matter kind of you need to win that series at the end of the year. 1, to stay ahead of the Mets, but 2, to have a tiebreaker against them because you're not going to get the second tiebreaker. How concerned, Christian, how concerned should Braves fans be about not making the postseason?
I think you have to be very cautious. Concern, yeah, I'm 50-50 on the word concern right now because you still have a postseason spot, but the person that's breathing right down your neck, the team that's breathing right down your neck, Lindsay, is on a 7-game winning streak. So maybe that concern's a little higher than 50%. Maybe we should go 60% concern because right now the Atlanta Braves, they lost the series finale, but let's face it, they won 2 out of 3 games. They did exactly what they needed to do.
Yeah. To your note, the 2 hot teams of the last 15 days entering last night, Phillies 10-4, New York's 11-3. They have been hot. Fangraphs actually gives Atlanta the edge on making the wild card and making the playoffs. Atlanta has a 68.7% chance of making the postseason. The Mets have a 45.2% chance. Obviously, that adds up to more than 100% because you have maybe something happen to the Padres and Diamondbacks and things like that. But this is really the only drama left in the postseason picture. Every other team in the postseason, all other 11 teams, have 82% chances or better of making the postseason that are currently in. So this is really the only drama, and everybody's going to be watching this down the stretch. I will say, and you pointed this out when we were recording First Pitch earlier today, which, by the way, that is our other show. Daily MLB Recap drops every weekday morning. Check that out wherever you get your podcast. I'll put a link in the episode description and over here in the corner. You pointed out that the Mets have one of the hardest remaining schedules down the stretch, while Atlanta has a somewhat easier schedule, and it's all because of New York having to play 2 division leaders a combined 10 times, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely one of the reasons. So the Mets have the 3rd toughest schedule the rest of the way. And really, it's the toughest schedule among contenders. The only 2 in front of them are the San Francisco Giants and Colorado Rockies, who are out of it. The Mets still have 7 games against the Phillies. I don't know if I'm going to be able to say this. I don't know if you're going to be able to do this, Lindsay, but you might have to be a Philadelphia Phillies fan for a couple series this time. So go ahead and open that bottle, maybe make it 2, make it a double because you're going to have to figure that one out. They also got the Brewers for 3 and of course the Braves for 3. The other 9 games they have in the series is the Washington Nationals, the Toronto Blue Jays, and then they're about to open a weekend series with the Cincinnati Reds. The Cincinnati Reds just came off a series win against the Houston Astros, winning the Astros haven't won a game, by the way, against the Reds since 2016. We talked about that on First Pitch. So interesting to see if the Reds can, continue their streak as well against the Mets. So they have a very tough schedule. On the other hand, the Braves are right in the middle of the pack. They are 500 the rest of the way. The rest of their opponents, have a 500 winning percentage. So they have to obviously capitalize, and they have to capitalize early because these teams that are at the beginning of their schedule are the ones that have those losing records. And with the Mets being in a 7 game winning streak, it's not more about just constantly winning their games. You have to keep up with the Mets. If they win a game, you obviously have to win that game. If they lose, yes, I guess you could say that you can afford that loss, but getting that win is important to get that step ahead. So every single game, the next 22 games are absolutely crucial to win. They don't need to go 22-0. I don't think they do, but they need to be very competitive in every single game down the stretch.
It's absolutely felt like 22-0 is what's going to be required.
For
Uh,
real, for
yeah.
real.
Okay. The thing to watch about the way these schedules break out too is New York's schedule is very difficult at the end, right? So like they get the Reds and then the Blue Jays, and then they go to Philly, and then they get the Nationals. But their last 10 games, 4 versus Philly, although they're at home, 3 in Atlanta, and 3 at the Brewers. And we're assuming the Brewers are going to be actually still trying and not have already locked up the division and playing a bunch of backups and setting their rotation. Whereas Atlanta, you get Blue Jays at home, 1 against the Reds, 2 against the Nationals, but then you have to host the Dodgers for 4. So, you're when you get the Mets later, you then get your final 3 against the Royals, who are probably going to be playing to hold on to their postseason spot over the surging Tigers and trying to catch up to the Twins ahead of them in the wild card race. So there is the potential here. It like both teams have winnable series, mind you. Like it looks like you could win your next 6 games are all winnable games, and the Mets are too. But then they go to Philly for 3, and they get the Nationals for 3, or I guess for 1 on Monday. You get LA for 4. So the day to day is going to be really interesting. The goal is at least to just be in a position on September 24th where a series win against the Mets can ensure that you will make the postseason. Like that is the goal. On a day to day basis, you may fall a game behind, you may fall a game ahead, but I still think this whole thing is going to be decided on the field on the 24th through 26th. I don't see it being decided ahead of that. I think it's going to come down to you've got to beat them 2 out of 3 in Atlanta at the end of September.
And I think that there's an even bigger picture here, Lindsay. I don't
Right.
think it's just down to the Braves and the Mets. I really don't. Now, I'm not talking about the Chicago Cubs because they're 4 behind. I do think that they're going to fall out, and maybe the New York Yankees put them to bed this weekend. However, I think that the San Diego Padres and Arizona Diamondbacks, all 4 of these teams should be talked about. When you're looking at these games the rest of the way, Braves fans, you need to be focusing on the NL West as well. Maybe set your alarms, maybe take a midday nap so you can start watching some late baseball because
Mhm.
some of these games out west are going to be really important as well. The top wild card spot to the Braves is only 3 games right now. The Braves are only 3 games behind the top wild card spot. Put that into perspective. So even if the Mets continue to be on a hot run, the Diamondbacks are 4-6 in their last 10. That really big winning streak they had in August is gone. San Diego Padres are only 6-4 in their last 10, same as the Braves. So put that in perspective. Okay, so there is a possibility that maybe you don't finish final in the wild card spot. Maybe you get a chance to move up to 1 or 2 in the wild card. And there's a possibility the Braves and the Mets make the postseason.
That would be absolutely wild if that happened. I genuinely have it's been so unsettling and uncomfortable to think about how this race has shaken out down the stretch and to go from the expectations you had entering the season
Yeah.
to temporarily being out of the postseason middle of the year when you lost that series to the Mets and then coming back and getting back into this contention, building a couple game lead over the Mets in the wild card and then seeing it go away again has been tough. I will say, to your point, Arizona's got 7 left against the Brewers, 3 against the Astros, and 3 against the Padres.
And they're dealing with a
Granted,
lot of injuries.
they are a lot of injuries. Ketel Marte supposed to come back this week, is the rumor, or sometime this weekend. We don't know yet, but either way, they've had a ton of injuries, and I think that is going to impact things down the stretch. Okay, just a minute. Let's get into some of what happened last night. Let's talk about Jorge Soler. Let's talk about Luke Jackson and answer a couple of your questions. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back into Braves Today. I'm Lindsay Crosby. He's Christian Rauh. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Crosby Baseball. He's at Christian S. Rauh. And then do us a favor. If you're on audio, leave us a 5-star review. If you're on video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, leave us a comment down below, especially if you have questions. One of the questions that we got quite a few questions here coming in, but one of the questions we got was in relation to a tweet that I put out last night, and it was about Jorge Soler. Is the bat worth the defensive liabilities that he have? And you have to ask Chris Sale about the defensive liabilities. It feels like every Sale start, there's a fly ball in right field that is odd. But do you have Jorge Soler's full Brave stat line with you, the batting average and stuff?
Yeah, so
Okay.
since he's moved over to the Atlanta Braves, he's played 28 games, slash line 184, 317, 379. So that equals out to a 696 OPS. So he's got 5 home runs, 13 RBIs.
Okay. I do want to explain to some people that is a little bit of a misleading stat line because he's played 6 games against Colorado, 3 in Colorado, 3 at home this week. Against Colorado, Jorge Soler is 9 of 24 with 4 homers and 10 RBI. Against everybody else, as a member of the Braves this year, he is 7 for 63 with 1 homer and 3 RBI. That's a batting average of 111. And I don't really know what's going on. It feels like he's still walking. He's getting on base. We saw him actually score from second on a base hit yesterday, which makes you feel good about the hamstring not really bothering him that much anymore. Maybe getting 2 hits in this Colorado series, I mean, the final 2 days is what he needed to have a big month down the stretch. But you're not getting enough from Jorge Soler. And this is the pattern you've seen all year, right? Guys coming into Atlanta and just underperforming based on what they did last year or what they're capable of. And a lot of the story of the Braves offense, the guys who have been in it, who actually have been around, been healthy, has been not living up to anywhere close to what they did last year. Are we at the point where we need to decide, are there games where we just don't play Jorge Soler or he doesn't start and he's maybe a pinch hitter late? Or should we keep running him out there every day so that he can find his way out of this slump?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think right off the bat, you should say, don't play him on Sunday when Chris Sale starts. I think that's a safe bet.
Give
You
him
talk about
Sunday
those,
off, please.
you talk about those walks. He's got 16 walks and 103 plate appearances for the Braves. So that is pretty impressive. Over
15 and change
15%.
percent. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not bad. That's not bad.
That's good. Yeah.
Um, but is that enough? That's the biggest question. And especially if you're going to be considered the leadoff hitter going into September, that might not be enough. Yeah, getting on base is important, don't get me wrong, but you need more from the leadoff hitter and when you're missing Ronald Acuna Jr., when you're missing Austin Riley. I do think that they need to continue to play him, as rough as it might sound right now, because if he gets out of that slump, we know what he's capable of. And if you look at the schedule that they have right now, the Toronto Blue Jays, Washington Nationals, Cincinnati Reds, this is the opportune time to play him, because I don't think you can afford to play him if he's slumping when you get to the Dodgers, when you get to the Braves, or excuse me, when you get to the Mets. So this is the time to play him and try to get him out of the slump. If we get closer down to the stretch, when we get to the Dodgers and he's not there, I think the conversation needs to maybe shift a little bit.
Yeah. I think part of the problem here is you don't really have a ton of great replacements. Ramon Laureano needs to play every day. And I got a little frustrated over the weekend. I think it was at one of the games where Jared Kelenic started over Laureano, and then obviously Kelenic hits a 3-run home run in the first inning. But it's something where Ramon Laureano is batting over 300 since he joined Atlanta, and it's pretty much at the point where he needs to be in the lineup almost every day. And I'm at the point of Jorge Soler. I feel like his ceiling is much higher than offensively than an Eli White, than a Jared Kelenic, things like that. Defensively, his floor is a lot lower than a guy like a Kelenic or an Eli White. But it needs to not be at the expense of Ramon Laureano, right? If you want to get Jared Kelenic into the lineup, or you want to get Eli White in the lineup, which he's really been coming in for defense late. He don't need him for center field anymore, but he's been coming in for defense late. It needs to be at the expense of Jorge Soler. It needs to not be at the expense of Ramon Laureano. And I think the Braves are at the point. Snit had a quote after last night's game. Let me go. I'm trying to find it real quick. But where he talked about honestly, they've got to manage every game to win every game. And I think taking Ramon Laureano out of the lineup is not the way to try to win every game. They've got to have Ramon Laureano in the lineup every day. And I think if they can do that, and you want to play Kelnick or somebody, it needs to be at the expense of Soler, not of Laureano.
No, I agree with you. And Soler's been a lot better against lefties this season. And unfortunately for him, none of the projected starters for the Blue Jays this weekend are left-handed. All of them are rights. Gosman, Barrizos, and Rodriguez. That's something as
What?
well to keep in mind. Maybe
Barrios.
it is
Barrios.
Barrios. My apologies. Yeah.
Barrizos. Barrios.
Talking too fast. Yeah.
Barrizos sounds like a sausage.
Yeah.
Barrios.
Or
Jose Barrios.
That does actually.
The Spanish sausage, yeah.
So he's had an 833 OPS against lefties, only a 702 OPS this season. That's an entire season span with his Giants as well against righties. Now, so maybe that's the direction you take then. If you got to make sure you keep Laureano in the lineup, because I do think that's correct. I also think you got to try and find a way to get Soler out of his slumps. Trying to manage that is not going to be an easy task. So you're dealing with a slump right now. Maybe the biggest thing is on Friday, you don't put him in the lineup and you wait for a lefty to come out of the bullpen and then you pinch hit him. Maybe that is the way that you get him out of the slump, to have him see only left-handed pitching for a little bit. I don't know if that's the right answer, but that could be a decision that they take.
Right. I don't know if I have a lot of faith in Atlanta doing that. I think the thing that you've seen from Brian Sedker, good and bad, look at Marcell Ozuna and what it did for him last year, good or bad, is they're going to stick with their veterans. They're going to play their veterans. They're going to keep running them out there every day, slumping or not slumping, until they can come out of it. And we saw Ozuna do it last year. It feels like that's what you're in for over this next week. And to your point, you would rather have him run out there and fail against the Reds, the Blue Jays, the Nationals, to potentially finally be taken out of the lineup on an everyday basis, than to fail against the Dodgers and the Mets and the Royals at the end of the year.
I'll say one pushback on that, what you said
Yeah.
about Ozuna of last season. The Braves were not in a position to be out of the playoffs last year when Ozuna was struggling. So
That's a good
that
point. That
could
was so
be,
early in the year.
yeah, that could be a deciding factor of maybe they decide to push the veteran out. But I do, like I said, I do think that this is the opportune time to give him that playing time before they get to the Dodgers and the rest of those winning record teams at the end of their schedule.
Yeah. Talking about pushing the veteran out, I had a question on Twitter last night from Dustin. He asked, why does Snitker on multiple occasions bring in people like Luke Jackson down one run to pitch? Wouldn't at least Bummer or somebody better be warranted to keep it at one run as many times as they've done that and ended up being down multiple runs? And so this is obviously in reference. Luke Jackson comes in, I believe it's for the 7th inning, gives up what ended up being an unearned run. It was because of Sean Murphy threw the ball into center field trying to catch a runner attempting to steal, who advanced to third and was later driven in. And that made it from 2-1 to 3-1 for the Rockies. But Snit actually addressed this after the game. He was asked a question. I believe he was asked by David O'Brien of The Athletic, which, if he was, probably the first hard-hitting question David's ever asked. Quote, our go-to guys can't pitch every night. We're going to have to spread that thing around. Our go-to guys, the leverage guys, have been unbelievable, but they can't pitch every day. Everybody's going to have to be a part of this thing. Even though we don't have a lot of games left, we have enough that we can wear those guys out, talking about the high leverage guys, if we're not careful. So other guys are going to have to step up and do the job also. And to Snit's point, Raisel Iglesias had thrown 3 of the previous 4 days and had thrown 53 pitches across that stretch. Joe Jimenez had pitched 3 of the previous 4 days and had thrown 46 pitches, including both of those guys threw on Tuesday and on Wednesday. So you should not have used them on Thursday. That was right. Aaron Bummer went more than an inning through 27 pitches. Thank you for finally using Aaron Bummer in a game that matters. And it was something Dylan Lee threw 17 pitches on Wednesday. Pierce Johnson threw 11 on Wednesday. You could have used Johnson in that situation, I feel like. The last time he had pitched before then was Sunday. But that's another situation where with Johnson, if you ended up taking a lead late, he was going to get the 9th inning. So they were obviously trying to hold him back. Your options really ended up being use Dylan Lee on a back-to-back, use Luke Jackson, use Grant Holmes. John Brebbia came in and pitched the 9th. That was his Braves debut. They weren't going to use him in a closer game until they knew what he was going to do. Your options were Luke Jackson, Dylan Lee on a back-to-back, unknown John Brebbia, Grant Holmes, or Jesse Chavez. I don't hate the decision to use Luke Jackson there simply because Snit's right. You can't burn these guys out every day. Would Dylan Lee have been better? Yes. I feel like if you take a lead, you want to have the option of using either Lee or Johnson for the ninth. But I don't really know how else you handle that unless you try to give Bummer, who's already at 27 pitches, and try to give him another inning.
Yeah, what I'm hearing, and I think my mind's pretty closed on this, so that's probably why it's helping the case. But what I'm hearing from what you said is there was a lot of other options that could have been used other than Luke Jackson last night. And the reason why my mind is so closed on this, Lindsay, is because Snit talks about how you can't use the high leverage guys. There might not be any leverage at all with Luke Jackson, at least as of lately. In August, he has a 7.20 ERA, and obviously he gets just an unearned run on September. But for the most part, in my mind, if you're a reliever, an unearned run is almost as important as an earned run. Your job is to not let people score. You're coming in out of the bullpen to come in relief. So I know throwing errors obviously come into play. Sure, got you.
Yeah.
But in the month of August, he pitched 10 innings. He allowed 9 runs, 8 of them earned. That's a lot coming out of the bullpen. That's just there's got to be a point where you have to decide, and we're in September right now, and we have a relief pitcher that did not get called up in the 28-man roster that many people think should have been called up, that is waiting to be switched. If you don't have any leverage from a guy like Luke Jackson, and the only reason that you're putting him out there is because you're trying to keep your other arms fresh, I think it's time that you make a change. And that's where my mind sits. I think Hernandez should be called up, and maybe you maybe tip the cap and say good luck to Luke Jackson the rest of the way, and send him on his way.
Yeah, Daisable Hernandez coming up for Luke Jackson. And this is something Luke Jackson's obviously making some money here. And I feel like that's probably part of the reason why they've stuck with him. And when he's been on, he's not been a bad reliever for Atlanta in 2021. 71 outings, ERA under 2. When he signed with the Giants in 23, 33 outings, a 2.97. He's not been a bad reliever in his career. Recent history, he's been bad this year. When they initially made the September call-ups, and when we were dealing with Chavez being bad and Luke Jackson being bad, and they didn't call up Hernandez, they added Brebbia instead, which, again, I wrote about that whole thing when they signed Brebbia on the Braves Today Substack, the first article we used to launch the Substack. I understood because you're trying to test out the options to see what you have for October, right? You want to see if Brebbia can make it. You want to see if you can fix Jackson and Chavez down the stretch. Because if not, postseason roster comes, you could just leave them off. Chavez didn't make the postseason roster last year. You could leave off, say, Jackson and Chavez, and you'll have the roster goes back to the normal size. So the one spot or the 2 bullpen spots you'd have to add, you can do Hernandez for one. You could do Brebbia for the other. You could do Jimmy Herget for the other. You can take a starter and you can stick a starter back there. Maybe it's I don't think they would stick Charlie Morton back there, but like you can take you can take a guy like a AJ Smith-Shawver and throw him in the bullpen. You have options. But something that this organization has done all season, and I don't know if they're just scarred from the injuries or what, is they've prioritized having as much depth as possible. You saw when they got Michael Harris back, I believe the corresponding move was to send Eli White down, and they kept Adam Duvall. And Adam Duvall's barely played since then. He's had a couple pinch hit appearances. He's run a few times. He's barely done anything. And as soon as they expand the roster, they brought Eli White back, and and Eli White's getting all the play that Adam Duvall would have gotten: pinch hitting, pinch running, defense, things like that. And it feels like that's where they are now. They're trying to not DFA Luke Jackson because they want him to be around just in case as another arm because of all the injuries they dealt with in the bullpen, whether it's guys going on the IL temporarily like Pierce Johnson did or losing guys like AJ Minter for the season. And part of me just wonders, is this kind of the one blind spot or flaw for Alex Anthopoulos? Is he just refuses to cut bait with a guy who has an ERA over 7 because he's worried about the worst case scenario instead of the right now, when the worst case scenario is not having an injury in the bullpen and not having a guy to replace it. The worst case scenario is not making the postseason at this point.
Yep. 100%. How much longer should a leash be for a guy like Luke Jackson? And should we even see him appear this weekend against the Blue Jays if the run deficit is within 2 on either side?
Yes. If it's a safe situation for either team, like if it's within 3 runs for either team, Luke Jackson shouldn't be in the game. And here's the thing to me, if you're not willing to use him when you're down by 1 or 2 runs, then he probably shouldn't be on the roster.
Yes.
That's my opinion. Now, obviously, Snit is willing to use him when you're down 1 run late in a game, on a game you need to win. And so that's why he's probably still on the roster. But it feels like that shouldn't be where we are. And that's where we are. And that's frustrating for Braves fans. I get it. I honestly, unless one of these guys happens to get hurt and go on the IL, and I'll remind people, MLB cracked down on what they call phantom IL stints. Guys need to actually have a medical issue to go on the IL. You can't walk up to a guy and say, hey man, your shoulder hurts, we're going to put you on the IL for 2 weeks when he's fine. You can't do that. The Mets got punished for that because they had a GM who used to do that. Every team did it. Don't get me wrong. Every team did it, but MLB is specifically cracking down on that. Now, the first time Luke Jackson says, hey man, I slept funny, my neck hurts, boom, IL for 2 weeks. I am aggressively looking for anything to put him on IL because I think that's the compromise for Atlanta. You don't lose the depth, but you also don't have to run him out there 2 times a week to give up runs. Is get him on the IL so you don't have to worry about it, but you can't fake it. It has to be legitimate.
Yep. No, I'm with you on that. I just don't think that leash needs to be much longer at all. If he has another outing that he allows a run before even finishing an inning, I think you have to make that change. I'm already at that point where you need to make the change now, but obviously we haven't seen a roster move or anything happen before this weekend series. If you get a good lead against Toronto, that's a perfect time to use him. But if you're remotely close, I was saying 2, but you say 3, so I'm with you on that as well. Don't use him. Don't use him at all.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of this series, we're going to wrap this up real quick. MLB.com doesn't have the Blue Jays pitchers listed, but it's been announced in both teams' game notes. I pulled those off the MLB press site there. Friday, Max Fried versus Kevin Gausman. Old friend alert for us there. That's at 7:20 p.m. Saturday, Spencer Schwellenbach versus Jose Barrios. That's also at 7:20 p.m. And then Sunday, Chris Sale versus Dario Rodriguez. That's at 1:35. And to your point, maybe Jorge Soler should get that day off. I'm Lindsay
All
Crosby.
right-handed pitching too.
There you go. All right-handed pitching. I'm Lindsay Crosby. He's Christian Rauh. Follow us on Twitter. If you're listening on audio, do us a favor. Leave us a 5-star review. It means a ton. If you're on YouTube, one, thank you for being here. Leave us a comment down below. Subscribe to the channel. But also, go subscribe to that audio feed. I really would do a lot to show believe that Braves Country supports their team and what we're doing here. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.